So, all these complicated things, where the heck do we go and find our answers? How do we know that we can trust what we're getting? Okay, so this is what these next slides are about. The tax authority. It's what guides our tax compliance. And it comes from three places. Statutory. We're talking about primary tax. These are the people we can count on because they are responsible for making the rules. Anybody outside of these three sources can try to explain it, can be experts, whatever, but at the end of the day, they're not responsible for the actual compliance. So as much as possible, we want to make sure that what we find comes from these primary sources. Okay? So instead of finding out what somebody said, we're going to go to that original source. So statutory means it was passed in a law. Administrative means it was part of the enforcement, or judicial, it was decided in court. So statutory sources is the 16th Amendment. We talked about that. That's not going to go back to that. Internal Revenue Code. That's what gets updated when Congress passes a new law. When they pass a new tax law. In that, closely related, when they pass laws, they have a lot of hearings and they have a lot of what we call committee reports as it goes through the process of getting passed. In those reports is indication often as to what the intention was of the law. So when it comes time to interpret that law as to how it should be applied, we put at least some weight on the idea of what was intended when they were in discussion about the law. Second source, administrative. This is basically IRS that operates under the Treasury Department. So when they issue official regulations or guidance, they are referred to as Treasury regulations or revenue rulings, revenue procedures, private letter rulings, or IRS notices. These come, and basically as you move up that line, that's more authoritative, more important, more you can count on. The regulations are the most authoritative, then revenue rulings, then revenue procedures. Okay? And they all have their own way of citing them. When you use one of these sources, you're going to put down what the citation is so that someone else could find it. And they each have kind of their own little notation, usually some kind of abbreviation, and then a numbering system, typically by year or by code section of the Internal Revenue Code. And then we can have judicial sources, like things when there's a disagreement, typically between these other sources or disagreement between the taxpayer and how the IRS interprets these regulations or these rules, we can go to court. And then a judge will listen to both sides and decide and issue their opinion. And those opinions can give us a great deal of guidance because often they will not only explain their decision, they'll explain why and what they based it on and what they were thinking when they did that. And you typically, when it involves taxes, it goes to the tax court, but you also can go to district court or federal court of federal claims initially with a tax case. Then things that, if you can't come to an agreement there, you don't think you got a fair shake, then they can be appealed to the U.S. Court of Appeals and ultimately to the Supreme Court. The difference about the Supreme Court decides if they will accept a case. On the other ones, if you file an appeal, they will listen to it. At least an initial argument. They may throw it out quickly, but you get at least that much of a hearing. But the Supreme Court does not have to take any case. And so they don't take tax cases very often because Supreme Court is looking for things that are broader in decision making. But occasionally they do, and we have to know and pay attention to when they do, because that's going to be very important guidance going forward. All right? So that's where you get it. There in the textbook, there are examples of how to cite each of these sources. Our discussions this semester will be about learning about these sources, getting familiar with utilizing them, finding them, citing them, reading them, all of those, so that we can understand that if asked a question in real life, we can go to primary sources and find the answers. Now, I will be honest with you, you're not going to encounter the kinds of questions you would in real life, which would be fairly complex typically. We're going to look at some fairly simple ones, and I'm going to kind of nudge you in the right direction. But hopefully you'll get a little experience in doing it, so that when you get confronted with a more complex question, you'll at least know how to start looking. And such. It's the kind of thing that takes experience, years of experience sometimes, to get used to the idea of finding answers and knowing when you have found enough evidence to support your contention, or to say, no, we can't do that, or whichever way the evidence goes. So just a quick review of Circular 230. Like I promised in an earlier podcast, this governs those that are paid to prepare your tax return. Remember, the person that signs at the bottom of that 1040, we are going to put ourselves in that position. We're not ready to get paid to do that yet, but that's the role we want to understand. Includes anybody who does it, including CPAs, which is what I am, attorneys, enrolled agents. It sets out how you operate with the IRS, with the ethical standards and expectations. If you don't, you can face penalties. Typically, if you're going to have to intend it to get really serious penalties, but you could be fined even if it was unintentional. Typically, it's not too bad if it was just unintentional, but if you do it regularly and you do it to deceive, then that's when things get more serious. It's a fairly lengthy document. You can review it. We're going to look at it in our discussion post, this first chapter, get a sense of what's in there, what kinds of questions and answers we could find in the Circular 230. We must obtain a PTIN, renewed annually. I just renewed mine for 2021. And if you are not a CPA, I'm a CPA, so I already have continuing education requirements. Attorneys have them. Enrolled agents have them. Okay, those that are not one of those must have a certain amount of continuing education to maintain their PTIN. Here's the basics of what a paid preparer must do. Okay, this is the very most basic. Notify clients of errors if you find them, provide information, sign the returns. We're going with electronic. You can't hold on to records. You got to return them. You got to provide a copy to the whoever your client is. And these are the things, the basics you can't do. Can't take a position unless you actually believe, and it doesn't have to be you're 100% sure, but if you can find some evidence that you believe that you could win the case, okay, a realistic possibility, then you can take that and not have it come back on you. Even if you lost, it wouldn't come back to you as being a negligent, because you took a position that you had a decent chance of winning, and it may have lost when you got to the IRS. IRS may disagree with you, but you won't face sanction because you took a reasonable stand. You can't charge a contingent fee except in certain cases, or too much fee. You can't try to make things go on forever, although that it's the IRS that usually makes things go on forever. Cash check for a client, those sort of things. Look at issues with maybe consider conflict of interest or lie to the IRS, all right, about what documents you have or that sort of thing. So that wraps up what we wanted to go for chapter 1 and gets us ready to go forward in our future chapters and discussion.